I almost dragged the email straight into spam. The subject line, payment request, wedding and honeymoon, looked like one of those phishing scams that prey on tired people at 10 o'clock at night. Then I saw the sender, Emily Carter, my daughter, my only child. I clicked. There wasn't a greeting. No. Hi, Mom? No exclamation marks the way she used to write to me from summer camp when she was 9 and homesick. Just a link to an invoice and 2 sentences beneath it. Please wire your share by Friday so vendors aren't delayed. Consider yourself lucky we're still letting you contribute. The invoice opened with a polite digital chime, like a store doorbell. $70,000 printed at the top in bold slate letters. I scrolled past line items that felt like movie props. Riverside Grand Estate Rental, $38,500. Couture Floral Installation, $7,200. Chef's Tasting Menu with Wine Pairings, $12,900. String Quartet and Sound, $3,600. Honeymoon Deposit, Santorini, $7,800. At the bottom, a logo for a payment processor and a deadline stamped in red. Due. Friday, 5 p.m. No invitation, no date card, no little vellum envelope with a pressed gold R for Riverside. Just a bill. I stared long enough for the laptop screen to dim. In the reflection, my face hovered like a smudge. 58, hair pulled into the kind of bun I tell myself looks neat instead of tired. The spare dining room around me too quiet for a weeknight. On the wall behind me, a magnet strip held Emily's old Polaroids. Ballet slippers looping in a window, the first time she stood in front of a school mural taller than her. Her gap-toothed grin with marker on her chin. The photos made a timeline that said, "We built something together." The email said, "You don't belong in it." I took a breath and heard the old wooden chair give its familiar creak. My hands found the shape of my mug, even though the tea inside had gone cold. It was chamomile, the kind I bought in bulk at the teacher's discount store, so my students would have something soothing during exam week. I'd made a cup out of habit the minute I arrived home. A little ritual that says the day is over, Linda, you made it. But the email made the day stretch out again, like a hallway that refuses to end. At first the feelings came as fragments, the way lightning splinters the sky but refuses to show you everything. Shock. Heat. One sharp flush, like embarrassment. Then a cooler, deeper sensation that settled behind my ribs. Not anger, not yet. Something more like humiliation in a measured, quiet shape. The note wasn't written by a stranger. It was written by my daughter, who used to use crayons to draw "I love you" on Post-its and hide them in my lunch bag. I clicked the invoice again to make sure my brain hadn't added the rudeness. There it was, black and white, a line my eyes couldn't not read. Consider yourself lucky we're still letting you contribute. Letting. The word caught somewhere in the soft part of me that, apparently, still expected respect as a given. Letting. My first instinct was to call. My fingers hovered over the keyboard to type. "Em, can we talk about this?" I heard exactly how she would answer. "Not a conversation, Mom. We don't want drama. Just do your part." It would be said in that new voice, the one that arrived when Daniel did. Polished and offended by ordinary things, like coupons and casseroles. I closed the laptop and let the room be quiet. Out on Maple Street, a car eased past, music low enough to sound like a memory. The living room clock ticked, cheap battery tick, not the dignified hush of a grandfather clock. The refrigerator hummed because it always hums, and somewhere in the building, a neighbor's toddler let out one sleepy, offended cry. The ordinary sounds stacked up around me, patient and unbothered. I didn't feel patient. I felt like I was standing alone on a stage while 1,000 people waited for me to remember a line I hadn't been given. I know how it sounds to say your grown daughter sent you a bill for her wedding and honeymoon. People imagine a soap opera or a reality show confession couch. But real life is smaller in the moment. An inbox, a dollar amount, The knowledge that your child has decided you are a resource instead of a person. A sponsor without a seat. I got up and crossed to the bookshelf, because the bookshelf is where I keep everything that reminds me I am more than roles. More than mom, or retired teacher, or widow. More than labels other people attach like price tags they don't intend to pay. There's a ceramic vase with a chip that looks like a dimple. Emily made it in 7th grade. There's a picture frame that refuses to stand up straight unless you wedge a folded grocery receipt beneath it. In that frame is a photo of us on a beach in North Carolina, wind blowing our hair into a tug of war. We're laughing so hard my mouth is open, eyes closed, hands up to hold nothing. No one looking at that photo would predict an invoice. I put the frame flat, face down on the shelf. Not because I was angry at the image, because I wanted the table to stop trying to hold both the past and the present at once. Then I did something very un-Emily. I sat back down and made a list. Teachers love lists, even retired ones. On the left, I wrote facts. On the right, feelings. It sounds childish or therapeutic, whichever makes you roll your eyes first, but it gave my mind a plank to stand on. Facts. There was an invoice for $70,000. The deadline was Friday. The wedding was at Riverside Grand Estate. The honeymoon deposit was already paid. There was no invitation in my inbox, past or present. There was no mention of me at the ceremony, no seat, no toast, no photo op, not even a, "We know this is hard." The note implied I should be grateful. Feelings. Hurt so sharp it made me defensive. A weariness that felt older than 58. The urge to call and plead. The urge to cut the wire, the way I used to strip old lamp cords to teach my students about circuits. Clean slice, copper bright in the middle. I wrote one more word, larger than the others. Dignity. I don't pretend I've always handled things right. Grief makes you clumsy in ways people don't notice until they bump into you. Money stretches only so far, even when you're good at stretching. Kids grow up and believe they invented disappointment. All of that is true. But so is this. I am not an ATM with legs. The kettle clicked back to life because I turned it on without remembering. While it heated, I reopened the laptop and moved to the one place I knew I would find the story Emily thought I didn't read. Instagram. Her profile wasn't private. It never is when the point is to be seen. The top grid was a mood board for a wedding magazine. Riverside Grand Estate from 6 angles, brick and ivy, river light like a filtered dream, a marble foyer designed for echoing heels and statements. A close-up of a pearly invitation belly band stamped E&D in gold. A boomerang of her hand clinking a champagne flute in a tasting room where the glasses stood like a choreographed chorus line. I didn't feel jealous. That surprised me. I felt like I'd been invited to admire a parade that closed the road I lived on. I clicked the wedding planner tag, 5th and Willow Events, and scrolled until I hit a post with a caption that made my breath tighten. When love meets legacy, details are destiny. Excited to celebrate E&D at Riverside this spring. The comments were full of the new world Emily lives in. Dying over this. The florals are going to be insane. Can't wait to see the boat send-off. There was a line item for boat send-off on the invoice. I hadn't even known river weddings came with boats. I set the laptop aside again. The room didn't feel smaller. It felt clearer. Facts, feelings, dignity. I didn't know yet whether I was supposed to fight, or forgive, or walk away. But I knew I wasn't going to wire $70,000 to people who couldn't be bothered to ask me what color dress I'd wear, couldn't be bothered to ask me to show up at all. People talk about mother instinct like it's only about protection from danger. Sometimes it's about protecting a line you don't want your child to cross. Sometimes it's about saying no so the person you love can hear the echo they've been ignoring. Before I powered down for the night, I wrote one last list. Vendors, Fifth and Willow Events, Planner. Riverside Grand Estate, Venue. Florals by Bell and Bloom, Chef Laurent Tea Quartet, River Chamber Strings. Travel, Aegean Dream Escapes. I didn't know exactly why I wrote them all, only that labeling things has always been my first step toward making them manageable. You can't fix or refuse what you can't name. The kettle clicked off. I poured hot water over the same chamomile bag and watched the color deepen despite being asked to work twice. When I brought the mug to my lips, the steam softened my eyes the way good steam does. I'm not a dramatic woman, not really. I cry at commercials with dogs and soldiers home from deployment. I laugh too loudly at potlucks. I fold fitted sheets badly and then pretend I meant to. But that night, with the invoice still open on the laptop and the Polaroid still smiling from the magnet strip, I made a small, private promise that felt solid enough to stand on. I will not be shamed into funding my own erasure. If my daughter wants a sponsor, she can call a winery. If she wants a mother, she knows where I live. I closed the computer and the room went dark except for the little green light on the router, blinking its steady heartbeat. In the quiet, I heard my own. It kept time with a word that had finally arrived. Not like lightning, but like sunrise. Enough. The morning after the invoice, I woke to the sound of rain tapping the windows. The kind of rain Kentucky sends when it's not sure if it wants to drizzle or pour. I lay there staring at the ceiling fan, listening to each blade slice the air, and thought about how many nights that fan had spun over Emily's childhood. Over homework at the kitchen table. Over birthday candles and the smell of boxed cake mix. Over arguments about curfews and the slam of her bedroom door. I reached for the nightstand drawer and pulled out a shoebox I hadn't opened in years. Inside were the fragments of a life I'd tried to piece together after her father died, Michael's driver's license, bent at the corner from being in my wallet too long. A funeral program with his photo, looking young and confident in the hard hat he wore the day the scaffolding gave way. Emily's recital tickets, faded pink stubs that once cost me half a week's grocery money. I remember that week vividly. I was 38, a widow with a 10-year-old whose eyes had gone flat with grief. I took on tutoring sessions every evening, algebra for freshmen, essay coaching for juniors, just to cover rent. Then Emily's violin teacher sent home a flyer. Spring recital, formal attire required. She wanted to quit because she knew the dress would be expensive. I told her we'd figure it out, and we did. I sewed her a dress from fabric on clearance, midnight blue with a ribbon around the waist. That night, when she stepped onto the stage, bow shaking in her hand, I clapped until my palms ached, and when she looked for me in the audience, searching the rows of strangers, she found me standing in the back, waving like a fool. Her face lit up, and for one perfect moment, the weight of Michael's absence didn't feel so suffocating. But memory is cruel. It doesn't stay sweet. It brings the echoes too. Years later, when Emily was 17 and furious that I couldn't buy her a prom dress from the boutique her friends shopped at, she threw the old recital dress at me. "This isn't normal, Mom. Everyone else's parents can afford better. Why can't you?" The words cut deeper than she realized, but I swallowed the sting and told myself she was just a teenager. I keep replaying those two versions of her, the little girl who glowed when I clapped, and the young woman who saw my sacrifices as embarrassments. By the time she left for college, Emily was already drifting toward a different orbit. She picked up jobs at art galleries, babysat for wealthy families, dated boys who drove imported cars. She came home for Thanksgiving one year with a new handbag I knew cost more than my monthly mortgage. She said Daniel bought it for her. "He says I deserve nice things, Mom," she said, like it was proof that she'd finally stepped into the life she wanted. I tried to smile, but part of me wondered if she thought I'd failed to give her that life. Now, sitting with that shoebox in my lap, the invoice replayed in my mind like a broken record. $70,000. A number so large it felt like a verdict. You're not enough, but your money could be. The rain outside picked up, streaking the windows, and I let myself cry in a way I hadn't in years. The kind of crying that doesn't ask for witnesses. I thought of Michael, how he would have hated this. He grew up on a tobacco farm and believed weddings were supposed to be potluck, with aunts bringing pies and uncles stringing lights in the barn. He would have laughed at the idea of a boat send-off. But he also would have wrapped me in those calloused hands of his and told me not to let our daughter treat me like a line item. I pressed the heel of my palm against my chest, trying to still the ache. Because under the hurt was something sharper, a realization that maybe Emily wasn't just careless. Maybe she'd been learning for years that appearances matter more than gratitude. Maybe I'd let her learn it, trying so hard to fill the gaps Michael left behind that I never taught her where the line was. The shoebox went back into the drawer, heavier than when I pulled it out. I sat on the edge of the bed until the rain slowed, listening to the silence that comes after a storm. Then I told myself something simple, almost like a prayer. You will not buy your way back into her life. If she wants you there, it has to be as her mother, not her sponsor. I didn't yet know what I was going to do, but I knew what I wasn't going to do. For a day or two after that rain-soaked morning, I tried to carry on as if the email had never arrived. I folded laundry, watered my spider plant, even baked a banana bread loaf for the neighbor down the hall who'd just had surgery. But all the while, the numbers and words from that invoice marched through my head like uninvited guests who wouldn't leave. 70,000. Due Friday. Consider yourself lucky. Each phrase jabbed at me in a different way. One like a bill collector, one like a ticking clock, one like a slap in the face. I found myself pacing the kitchen more than usual, wearing a groove in the faded linoleum by the counter. The kettle whistled twice that afternoon because I forgot to pour the water the first time. That's how distracted I was. By Thursday evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a pad of lined paper. The same kind I used to grade my students' essays on. I wrote the words, if I pay, what happens? If I don't pay, what happens? On the left side, I listed the consequences of giving in. Emily and Daniel get their perfect wedding. I remain invisible, uninvited. My savings, money I've been putting away for retirement, for emergencies, would evaporate. I would feel used. On the right, the consequences of refusing. Emily's wedding plans collapse. She might hate me. Daniel would certainly hate me. I might be the villain in their story, at least for a while. But I would keep my dignity. I underlined that last line 3 times. It reminded me of something Michael once said, years ago when Emily was still small. We were sitting on the back porch with mugs of coffee, watching her chase fireflies with a jar. He told me, Linda, dignity's the one thing no one can buy for you. You either hold it or you hand it over. At the time, I thought he was being poetic. Now, it felt like he had been leaving me a map for a moment like this. I decided, right then, I wasn't going to hand it over. But a decision is one thing. A plan is another. I couldn't just stomp my foot and hope the world rearranged itself. Emily and Daniel clearly had vendors lined up, deposits made, and contracts in place. They were counting on my money to patch over the gaps. If I simply refused and stayed quiet, they might spin the story their way, that I was bitter, petty, unwilling to help my daughter on her big day. I needed something sturdier than silence, so I opened the laptop again, this time not to cry over Instagram posts, but to study them. Emily had tagged the venue, the florist, the caterer. She and Daniel were practically doing the detective work for me, broadcasting every step of their glamorous preparations. Each post was a breadcrumb, and I followed the trail with the kind of focus I used to reserve for lesson planning before parent-teacher conferences. Riverside Grand Estate. I clicked through their page, studied photos of the ballroom, the sprawling lawn by the river, the glowing chandeliers. Price tags practically gleamed between the pixels. Bell and Bloom florals, luxury arrangements with roses that looked like they had their own PR team. Chef Laurent Tea, a caterer known for pairing wine flights with 6-course meals. It was all so loud, so performative, and I thought, they're building this entire show on the assumption that I will bankroll it quietly. What if I don't? What if I pull one card from their carefully stacked tower? I scribbled vendor names into my notebook, like puzzle pieces I might rearrange later. When I leaned back, my eyes landed on the bookshelf again. The photo of Emily in her recital dress still lay face down where I'd placed it the other night. I picked it up, looked at her small, serious face clutching the violin. My heart squeezed. I didn't want to destroy her life. That wasn't what this was about. I wanted her to see me, to remember that behind all the sacrifices and scraped-together tuition payments was a woman with her own worth. A mother, not a sponsor. That night, before bed, I whispered into the quiet room, as if Michael were still listening. I won't fight her with anger. I'll fight her with truth. I didn't know what that truth would look like yet, but I felt a current of resolve settle into me, steadier than the rain, heavier than fear. And with that, the plan, whatever it would become, had begun. The next morning, I woke before the alarm. The apartment was still gray with dawn, the kind of gray that makes you wonder whether it's worth brewing coffee yet or just crawling back under the blanket. But my body felt alert, restless, almost like I used to feel before parent-teacher conferences. Nerves coiled tight but focused. I padded into the kitchen, switched on the kettle, and pulled the notebook toward me again. The names I had scrawled, Riverside Grand Estate, Bell and Bloom florals, Chef Laurent Tea, River Chamber Strings, stared back like suspects on a bulletin board. I knew one thing. Vendors in the wedding industry don't mess around with unpaid bills. If I held my money back, those contracts would strain, maybe even snap. Emily and Daniel assumed I would send the funds before anyone blinked. But what if I let the vendors blink first? I poured my coffee and stared at the steam rising. That's when a knock rattled my front door. It was Sarah. Sarah has been my neighbor for nearly 20 years, ever since she downsized from a suburban house after her divorce. She's the type who brings soup when you're sick and gossip when you're not. But more importantly, she once worked as a hotel manager before she retired. She knows the service industry like a second language. "Morning, Linda," she said, holding a Tupperware of muffins. "I baked too many again." I let her in, and soon the kitchen smelled of blueberries and cinnamon. We sat at the table, me nursing coffee, her unwrapping foil from the muffins. She's the kind of woman who notices things even when you don't say them. "You've got that storm in your eyes look," she said finally. "What's going on?" I hesitated, then pushed the laptop toward her. The invoice glowed on the screen. She read silently, eyebrows climbing higher with every line item. 70,000? And no invitation? Her voice went sharp. "Oh, Linda!" I nodded, feeling both embarrassed and oddly relieved. Saying it aloud made it less like a nightmare and more like a challenge to be solved. "Here's the thing," Sarah said, tapping the invoice with a fingernail painted crimson. "Events like this run on contracts, deposits, Timelines, balances due. If a big piece of the puzzle doesn't come through, everything wobbles. You don't have to fight with Emily directly. Let the industry do it for you. Her words sank in like stones into water. I didn't want a screaming match with my daughter. I wanted her to see what happened when she treated people, me included, like bottomless wallets. So what do? I asked. Gather information, Sarah said matter-of-factly. Call around, ask questions, don't lie. Just introduce yourself as who you are. Vendors talk more than you think, and once they realize the money isn't guaranteed, she gave a little shrug. Well, things unravel fast. It was the first time I felt like I had a partner in this. We spent the next hour drafting a list of calls. Sarah knew exactly what to ask. When is the next payment due? What happens if the balance isn't received on time? What's your cancellation policy? By noon, we had enough notes to fill 3 pages. Each vendor had a different deadline, but they all had one thing in common. They expected a large payment very soon. Without it, they'd cancel services without blinking. I closed the notebook and exhaled. For the first time since that email, the weight on my chest felt lighter. I didn't need to scream or plead. I just needed to wait. Before Sarah left, she squeezed my hand. You're not cruel, Linda. You're teaching a lesson she needs. Don't forget that. After she was gone, I sat by the window with the muffins cooling on the counter. Outside, kids were biking down Maple Street, their laughter carrying in the crisp air. I thought about Emily at that age, hair tangled, cheeks red from running. She used to shout, "Watch me, Mom!" And I always did. Now she didn't want me to watch at all. She just wanted me to pay. I touched the notebook, the ink still fresh, and whispered to the empty room. Then watch what happens without me. By the following week, the phone began its relentless campaign. First, a polite nudge, then a sharper tone, then the avalanche. It started on a Tuesday evening. I was rinsing dishes when the ringtone echoed through the apartment, muffled from where the phone lay on the counter. Emily's name lit up the screen. For a second, my chest tightened with the old mother's reflex. Pick up, answer. It might be important. But then I remembered the invoice. I let it ring until it went silent. 2 minutes later, a voicemail appeared. I pressed play. Mom? Hey. So, the planner said he hasn't received the transfer yet. Could you take care of it tonight? We don't want any hiccups with the estate. Thanks. Her voice was light, like she was reminding me to water the plants while she was on vacation. No hint of apology, no warmth, just expectation. I set the phone down and finished rinsing. The water swirled, suds vanishing, the hum of the dishwasher filling the silence that followed. The next day, another call, another voicemail. This time sharper. Mom, this is serious. The vendors are asking questions. Daniel's getting frustrated. You promised you'd help. Don't make this complicated. I hadn't promised anything, not once. The manipulation made my jaw tighten. That evening, I called Sarah. She's escalating, I told her. Record everything, Sarah said. Every word. If they try to paint you as the villain later, you'll have proof. So I installed the recording app Sarah had recommended. From then on, whenever the phone lit up with Emily's name, I hit the red button. By Thursday, the politeness was gone. The third voicemail cracked like a whip. Mom, what are you doing? This isn't just about you. If you don't pay, the whole thing could fall apart. Stop being selfish. We've worked too hard for this. I replayed that one twice, then scribbled the words in my notebook. Selfish. That was the insult that stung most, because I'd built my life on the opposite. Giving, stretching, sacrificing. But reading it in my own handwriting turned the sting into steel. On Friday, my phone lit up with a FaceTime request. I nearly declined, but curiosity got the better of me. I pressed accept. Emily's face filled the screen, perfectly made up, hair smoothed into glossy waves. Beside her, Daniel leaned in, his jaw tight, his tone clipped. "Linda," he said without preamble, "we need that transfer today. The estate is threatening to release our date if the balance doesn't come through. Do you really want to ruin your daughter's wedding over money?" Over money? The irony almost made me laugh. I steadied my voice. "Daniel, this isn't about money. It's about respect. You sent me a bill, but not an invitation. Why would you expect me to fund a wedding I'm not welcome at?" Emily cut in, her voice rising. "Mom, please don't do this right now. You don't understand how embarrassing this is. Everyone's expecting a flawless day. Don't make me beg." Something in me hardened. "Then don't," I said quietly, and I ended the call. The silence that followed was electric, like the stillness before a storm. I sat at the table, the recording app still glowing, the kettle whistling faintly in the background. For the first time, I felt the balance of power shift. That weekend, Sarah came by again. I played the recordings for her. She listened, lips pursed, shaking her head. "They're panicking," she said. "And it's only going to get worse the closer we get to the date." Her words were both warning and reassurance. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. My daughter thought she could bend me with guilt, with fear of being excluded, with the pressure of appearances. But each call only showed me how fragile their perfect plan really was, and I realized I didn't have to break it. All I had to do was stand still and watch it collapse around them. The countdown to the wedding had begun. 3 weeks, then 2, and I could feel the desperation in every call, every voicemail, every frantic text that popped up on my screen. Vendors, it turned out, were less patient than my daughter assumed. On a drizzly Wednesday morning, I received the first hint that the dominoes were tipping. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. When I answered, a polite voice introduced herself as Marissa from Bell and Bloom Florals. "Mrs. Carter? I'm sorry to bother you," she said, "but I understand you're listed as the primary family contact for Emily and Daniel's wedding." For a moment, I said nothing, letting the words hang. Primary family contact. That was news to me. Marissa cleared her throat. "We haven't received the remaining deposit, and our cancellation window closes this Friday. If the balance isn't settled, we'll need to release the arrangements. Could you confirm payment will be made?" I almost laughed at the irony. They had written me off as too ordinary to attend, yet here I was, the one vendors believed held the strings. "I can't confirm that," I said evenly. "You'll need to speak directly with Emily or Daniel." There was a pause, the sound of typing in the background. "Understood," she said finally, though her tone carried the professional frustration of someone who had already heard excuses. When the call ended, I felt an unexpected wave of satisfaction. Not glee, not cruelty, just a steady sense that the cracks were real now, not imagined. 2 days later, another call, this time from the estate manager at Riverside Grand. "Mrs. Carter, good afternoon. We've been informed you're one of the financial guarantors for the Carter-Dawson wedding. We still haven't received the final transfer, and without it, we'll need to release the ballroom for another event." I pictured Emily's face, the way she loved posing against the marble staircase in those Instagram posts, bragging about our dream venue. I imagined her scrolling through her feed, blissfully unaware that the dream was one overdue payment from vanishing. Again, I gave the same response. "You'll need to take that up with Emily and Daniel. I won't be sending anything further." This time, the silence on the other end was heavier. The estate manager exhaled sharply. "That will cause serious issues for them." "I know," I said simply. By the weekend, Emily herself was unraveling. She showed up in my voicemail 3 times in a single day. Mom, why are you doing this? Do you realize how much work we've put into this? Guests have booked flights. You can't back out now. You're humiliating me. Do you want people to think I can't even control my own mother? And the last one, her voice cracking. Please, Mom, just this once. Don't ruin it. I played that one over, listening carefully. There was no apology in her words, no recognition of the insult she had delivered weeks earlier. Only fear of public embarrassment. Sarah stopped by that evening. I poured us tea while she settled into her usual chair. They're cornered, she said after I shared the voicemails. You don't need to lift a finger, just hold steady. But what if... I hesitated, ashamed of the thought. What if this pushes her so far away, she never comes back? Sarah studied me, her expression softening. Linda, you've been carrying her weight for years. If this is what it takes for her to see you as a person, then maybe the distance is necessary. Her words settled like stones in my chest, heavy, but grounding. The following week, Sarah's prediction came true. Alex, the violin instructor's son, who still lived in the neighborhood, sent me a message. He'd been hired as a part-time server for Riverside events. Mrs. Carter, he wrote, I overheard the staff today. They said the Carter-Dawson wedding might be pulled if payments don't clear. Just thought you should know. I read the message twice, then closed my eyes. The dominoes were falling, one by one. The fairy tale Emily and Daniel had built on Instagram was starting to fracture in real life. And all I had done was say no. The morning of the wedding broke gray and heavy, clouds swollen like they carried a grudge. Rain streaked down the window of my apartment in Lexington, and I couldn't help but think, sometimes the weather gets it exactly right. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee, steam curling upward, phone on the table beside me. Sarah had texted early, vendors already pulling out, caterer's truck left. Florist refused to unload. It's a mess, Linda. I set the phone down and let the words sink in. A mess. That was the last thing Emily had ever wanted people to associate with her. By 10 a.m., photos started arriving from Sarah's niece, who worked part-time with a catering crew and had slipped onto the estate grounds before they were dismissed. I scrolled through each image slowly, letting them settle into me like pages in a book. A cluster of guests huddled under umbrellas, staring at a half-empty tent where tables were supposed to be. Rows of chairs on the lawn, slick with rain, no covers, no ribbons, just wet wood. A truck backing out of the drive with the Bell and Bloom logo smeared by raindrops on the window. I almost felt sorry. Almost. Around noon, my phone buzzed with a call. Emily. I let it go to voicemail. Mom, please, you have to fix this. Everyone's here, nothing's ready. The estate manager says we're out of time. This is humiliating. Her voice broke, not with grief, but with panic. I told them you'd handle it. Why are you doing this to me? I sat back in my chair, the voice message looping in my head. I told them you'd handle it, as if I were not her mother but her accountant, her safety net, her invisible lifeline. Sarah stopped by in the early afternoon, coat dripping from the rain. You should have seen it, Linda, she said, breathless. People standing around with umbrellas like it's some picnic gone wrong. No music, no food, just whispers and frowns. I heard one guest mutter, all this money and they couldn't even plan properly. I covered my mouth with my hand, torn between a laugh and a sigh. And Emily? She looked like porcelain about to crack. Daniel was shouting at a delivery guy in the driveway. It's all unraveling. By 3 o'clock, another voicemail, this one angrier. Mom, you're destroying us. Do you understand? People are leaving. Guests flew in for nothing. You'll regret this. Do you hear me? You'll regret it. The threat was hollow. I could tell by the way his voice wavered. But still, I saved the message. Around dusk, Sarah texted me again. Bride in tears, groom furious, guests dispersing. It's over. I poured myself a second cup of coffee, sat by the window, and watched the rain streak down like lines on a ledger. Debits, credits, dignity, all accounted for. I thought that was the end of it. But at 8 p.m., a pounding rattled my front door. Heavy, insistent. When I looked through the peephole, I froze. Emily stood there, veil askew, hair plastered by the rain. Daniel loomed beside her, tuxedo jacket soaked through, face pale with fury. They looked less like a bride and groom than two people shipwrecked, dragged onto shore by the storm. I opened the door, only a crack. "Mom!" Emily sobbed, clutching the edges of her gown under her coat. "Please, it's ruined. They left. Everyone left. We can't even salvage the honeymoon without your money. Please, just transfer it. Please." Behind her, Daniel's jaw tightened. "You've humiliated us," he spat. "Fix it." I gripped the doorframe, steadying myself. For a moment, the mother in me ached to wrap Emily in a towel, to tell her it would be okay. But then, I remembered the email, the invoice, the line. "Consider yourself lucky we're still letting you contribute." I opened the door wider, but only to stand tall. "You wanted my money, not my presence. Tonight, you have neither." Emily's tears ran hot, mixing with the rain. "Mom, I'm sorry, But Daniel tugged her arm, scowling. "We shouldn't have come." I shook my head slowly. "Maybe you should have invited me in the first place." And then, with a calm I didn't know I still had, I closed the door. Their footsteps retreated down the hallway, echoing against the rain. Inside, the apartment felt warmer than it had in months. When the door finally shut on their retreating footsteps, I leaned against it for a long moment, listening to the storm outside blur their voices into nothing. My heart thudded in my chest, not from fear, but from the strange calm that comes after standing your ground. I moved to the window and parted the curtain. Their car headlights cut through the rain for a moment before vanishing down Maple Street. Then only darkness remained, the kind that makes a room feel like it's breathing with you. I sank into my armchair by the window, still in the clothes I had been wearing all day, an old sweater, soft from years of washing, and black slacks I wore when I wanted to look put together without trying too hard. I wrapped my hands around a mug of tea, even though it had gone cold. The bitterness tasted sharper, but real. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the heaviness of that invoice pressing on me. Instead, there was space. Space to remember who I was before my daughter reduced me to a payment plan. The phone buzzed once more. Another voicemail. I didn't answer, but curiosity tugged. "Mom?" Emily's voice whispered through the speaker. This time she sounded smaller, stripped of her polished tone. I regret it. All of it. I shouldn't have shut you out. I don't know how to fix this." The message ended there. No demands, no deadlines, just a raw edge of something like honesty. I set the phone down, my chest tight with a mix of sorrow and relief. Maybe it was the first crack in her armor. Maybe it was just the grief of a ruined wedding. Either way, it wasn't my burden to solve anymore. The following days were filled with echoes. Neighbors knocked to check in, offering casseroles or just warm smiles. Word had spread, as it always does. Mr. Ellis from across the street stopped me while I was getting the mail. "Linda," he said gruffly, "saw some of the mess on social media? Good for you. Took guts not to let them walk all over you. I smiled faintly, thanking him, though a part of me still stung. Validation doesn't erase the ache of a fractured bond, but it does remind you that you're not invisible. Sarah came by with her usual muffins. We sat at the kitchen table, laughing a little too hard at silly things. "Linda, you've reclaimed your dignity," she said. "And dignity's worth more than any ballroom or honeymoon." I believed her. That night, I pulled the original invoice from the drawer where I had shoved it weeks earlier. I held it over the fireplace and watched the edges curl, blacken, and turn to ash. The flames flickered bright, then settled back into calm. Just paper, I thought. Just numbers. No power left. In the quiet that followed, I began to imagine new rhythms. Maybe I'd finally take the trip to Asheville I'd postponed for years. Maybe I'd sign up for the pottery class Sarah kept nagging me about. Maybe I'd start living for myself, not as a shadow in someone else's perfect photograph. I wasn't closing the door on Emily forever. A mother's heart doesn't work that way. But I was done letting her mistake my love for a blank check. When I stepped outside the next morning, the storm had passed. The air smelled of earth and rain, the sky pale blue and forgiving. Sunlight filtered through the branches, scattering gold across the sidewalk. I lifted my face to it and whispered, almost like a toast, "To dignity reclaimed." For the first time in years, I felt free. The days after the failed wedding carried a strange quiet. No more frantic calls, no urgent texts, no invoices slipped into my inbox like wolves in paper clothing. Just silence. At first, it felt eerie, like the eye of a storm. I half expected Daniel to reappear at my door, fists tight, voice dripping with blame. But instead, it was neighbors, old friends, and Sarah, always Sarah, who filled the quiet. They came with encouragement, with slices of pie wrapped in foil, with small affirmations that dignity matters. Still, late at night, I found myself listening for the phone. Mothers don't shut off worry like a light switch, no matter how grown their children are. On the third night, the phone finally buzzed. Not a call, just a text. "I'm sorry, Mom. I miss you. Emily." I stared at those words for a long time. My thumb hovered over the keyboard, caught between the urge to reply immediately and the instinct to let her sit with the weight of what she'd done. For once, I didn't rush to soften the blow. I set the phone face down and breathed. The next morning, I walked to the park, the one where Emily had learned to ride her bike. The trees were turning, their leaves falling in copper and amber drifts. I sat on a bench near the playground and remembered her small hands gripping the handlebars, her squeal of fear turning into laughter when she realized I'd let go. She wobbled, but she stayed upright. That memory stayed with me as I thought about her text. Maybe this was another wobble. Maybe she needed to fall a little before she learned balance. When I got home, I finally typed a reply. "I love you, Emily, but love isn't money. When you're ready to see me as your mother again, my door is open." I pressed send, my hands steady. Weeks passed. Sometimes she texted, short things, small apologies. Sometimes silence stretched long again. I didn't push. Healing, I knew, was like rain soaking into dry ground. It takes time before you see green again. Meanwhile, my life began to widen in ways I hadn't expected. Sarah dragged me to that pottery class. My first bowl was lopsided, but when I held it in my hands, warm from the kiln, I felt proud in a way I hadn't in years. I booked a weekend in Asheville, walked through the Biltmore Gardens, let myself marvel at beauty without worrying who would approve. For the first time in decades, I was living for myself. Not for invoices, not for appearances, not for someone else's approval. One evening, I set the crooked bowl on my table and filled it with fresh blueberries. I snapped a photo and sent it to Emily. Her reply came within minutes. "Nice, Mom. Save me some when I visit." Visit. The word glowed on the screen, fragile but real. I smiled, tucking the phone into my pocket. I didn't know when she would come, or how many walls would still stand between us. But I knew this much. When she did, she'd find a mother waiting, not a bank. And as I closed the curtains that night, the city quiet around me, I whispered once more the words that had carried me through. To dignity reclaimed,